Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Captain Scarlet Cipher Wilson sat at the edge of the long steel-gray table, hands folded, posture crisp, eyes scanning the room. She wasn't invisible. She wore the same uniform, bore the same insignia, carried the same weight of responsibility. But in that moment she might as well have been. The SEALs spoke over each other, joking in low tones, their laughter dark and heavy, the kind that masked exhaustion. Their commanding officer laid out the next steps with clipped authority, and Scarlet, she waited unseen. Her eyes fell on the empty chair 2 seats away. The name tag still rested there. Petty Officer Michael Tors, 24 years old, too young to be gone, too young to have his name already carved into stone. His last mission had ended the same way too many had lately, with bodies on the ground, blood staining sand, and the silence of radios that should have been alive with voices. Scarlet's chest tightened. She swallowed it down. This wasn't the place for grief, not in front of men who barely looked her way. She was the intelligence officer, the one who was supposed to connect the dots, the one tasked with giving them the edge. But lately, every edge had been dulled. Every mission had unraveled. Ambush after ambush. Patterns that made no sense unless someone was feeding the enemy. She sat, someone was. She could feel it. But the thought was poison. To say it out loud would be to accuse one of the men in this very room. And trust was the currency of survival. You didn't suggest betrayal here, not unless you were ready to tear apart everything these men believed in. Her pen clicked softly, once, twice, 3 times, no one noticed. At 300 hours, long after the laughter of the team had faded into silence, Scarlet sat in her office surrounded by casualty reports, encrypted files and photographs she didn't want to look at but couldn't ignore. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their cold glow searing her tired eyes. On her desk lay a dozen folders. 12 men, 12 SEALs, all brothers, all cleared, all trained to perfection. And yet 4 were dead in just 3 weeks. She pressed her fingers against her temple, forcing herself to see what no one else wanted to. She was 31. Auburn hair pulled tight in a regulation bun, green eyes that rarely missed detail, a mind sharpened to find patterns in chaos. Her world was numbers, signals, hidden codes, movements traced through shadows. But this chaos was different. It wasn't abstract. It had names, faces, lives cut short. Michael Tors, 24, smiled too easily according to his file. Gone. Scarlet breathed out slowly, her voice whispering into the empty room. Someone did this to you. The thought had haunted her since the first ambush, but now it pressed heavier, undeniable. These weren't bad luck missions. These were traps, enemies positioned exactly where the SEALs would arrive, explosives waiting on their exact entry route, kill zones tailored to the team's maneuvers. Coincidence? No, someone was telling them. She flipped through reports. Operation Silent Thunder, Operation Steel Rain, different intel sources, different channels, different timelines. The only common thread was the team itself. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence sink in. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and paper. She wanted to trust them, wanted to believe, but the numbers wouldn't let her. Her fingers tapped the desk. She reached for the personnel files. One by one, she spread them across the surface like cards in a grim game. 12 men, decorated, loyal, battle-tested. But if one of them had broken that trust? Scarlet's throat tightened. Betrayal was an ugly word. It eroded the foundation of everything these men stood for. Yet betrayal was the only explanation that fit. She leaned back in her chair. The leather creaked softly under her weight. For a moment she was just a woman, alone, staring at faces of men who trusted each other more than life itself. Men who probably dismissed her as just another intel officer in an office far from the fight. But she knew better. She had studied betrayal long enough to recognize the scent of it. The question wasn't if, it was who. Scarlet began where she always began, with data. Cold, impartial, merciless data. She tapped into the NSA archives, requesting months of intercepts, emails, phone calls, text messages, every keystroke and signal these men had made. For 3 days she hardly slept, her eyes tracing endless strings of text. She looked for the irregular, the gaps, the silence where words should have been, the conversations that felt too polished. Nothing. Her frustration built like pressure behind her ribs. The SEALs' communications were clean. Calls to families, messages about promotions, birthdays, deployment delays. Even the crude humor, the late-night jokes, they all fit the profile of men living the relentless rhythm of war. She dug deeper. Finances. If betrayal had a language, money spoke it fluently. Gambling debts, sudden wealth, suspicious transfers. But their accounts reflected only modest salaries, mortgages, car payments, the occasional vacation expense. No bribes, no unexplained windfalls. Again, nothing. Scarlet rubbed her tired eyes, leaning forward until her forehead touched the edge of the desk. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe the leak was higher up, support staff, communication techs, someone outside the team. But her gut resisted. That primal instinct sharpened by years of training. It whispered, look again. And then an anomaly. Buried in the ordinary chatter was one email. Petty Officer First Class David Hawk, to his sister, 3 days before Operation Silent Thunder. The words looked harmless, casual. A camping trip planned for the weekend, talk of weather, mention of an old stone bridge. She almost dismissed it. Almost. But then the hairs on her neck rose. She checked the timestamp. 6 hours after the final operational briefing. 18 hours before deployment. Scarlet frowned. Her pen stilled. She read it again. Storms from the northeast around midnight Saturday. Her mind mapped the operation details. Silent thunders approach route northeast. The old stone bridge. She pulled satellite images. The target compound lay near a weathered stone bridge. Coincidence? It had to be, but her gut screamed otherwise. She dug deeper, pulled his previous emails, and her heart stopped. Every compromised mission had a matching message. Casual notes, weather, camping trips, old memories, innocent on the surface. But lined up against the operations, the codes emerged like ink under fire. Her hands shook as she scrolled. Wasn't just talking to his sister, he was feeding someone else, hidden inside the words. Her breath caught. She whispered it, like confessing a sin to the empty room. It's him. But knowing wasn't enough. In this world, accusations could destroy careers, and if she moved too soon, would vanish, or worse, adapt. She needed proof. More than that, she needed to turn his betrayal into an opening. Her chair groaned as she leaned back, staring at the ceiling tiles. The weight of it pressed her down. One man's betrayal, dozens of lives lost. She thought of Tor's again, his easy smile, his faith in his brothers. Did he know? Did he sense it when the bullets started flying? Scarlet's chest ached. Anger burned low, steady. But beneath it was something heavier. The thought that one of their own could do this, could look his teammates in the eye and still plot their deaths, that cut deeper than any enemy. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. Her eyes lingered on file. His photograph stared back at her, square jaw, confident grin, the face of a man anyone would trust. And yet trust was the mask. Scarlet whispered into the still air, voice steady, cold. I'll find you out. And when I do, it won't just be about stopping you. It'll be about making sure no one else ever has to bury another brother because of you. But there was something she hadn't told anyone yet. Not her superiors. Not even the SEAL commander who demanded answers. She wasn't going to just catch. She was going to use him. The plan had already begun forming in the quiet corners of her mind. Because sometimes the only way to stop a betrayal was to let it play itself out. What if the man you trusted with your life was the one pulling the trigger against you? That question gnawed at Scarlet as she stared at the grainy surveillance feed. The timestamp blinked in the corner, 2:13. She hadn't slept in nearly 26 hours. Her office had grown claustrophobic, walls closing in, air stale, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to her uniform. Yet she couldn't leave. Not now. Her screen showed sitting casually at his barracks desk, laptop open, posture relaxed. His hands moved across the keyboard, slow, deliberate, like someone writing to a loved one. To the casual eye, it was exactly that. A serviceman reaching out across the distance to family. But Scarlet knew better now. She'd already run the images through steganography software. Inside those smiling snapshots, fishing at a lake, grilling burgers, holding a puppy, were hidden blueprints of death, enemy units, positions, and dates. He was giving the enemy their every move. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't the act itself that sickened her most. It was the calmness, the way he smiled as he hit send, the way betrayal sat on his shoulders as easily as his uniform. Scarlet leaned back, pressing her palms over her eyes. For years she had believed in the sanctity of brotherhood, the invisible cord that tied soldiers together. That bond had saved her once back when she'd been caught in a failed overseas operation, pinned down with a radio gone dead. A Marine she'd never met before pulled her out under fire. He didn't know her name. Didn't need to. Brotherhood was enough. Now here was, burning that bond to ashes. Her computer chimed. A new intercept. She dropped her hands, eyes narrowing. The subject line was blank. The body of the email, 4 sentences long. Hey sis, weather's turning again. Might have to cut the trip short. Thinking of packing early just in case. Scarlet's pulse thudded. The trip was the mission. The weather was troop strength. Packing early meant movement before schedule. She pulled up the mission log. SEAL Team Bravo had an insertion planned in 36 hours, had already leaked it. Her throat tightened. She should report him, right now. Shut it down before more men walked into fire. But something held her back. If she did that, the leak would end, yes, but so would the chance to strike back. If she played this carefully, she could flip the betrayal, used to mislead the enemy, turn their certainty into a trap. She stood abruptly, packing the narrow office. Her boots echoed against tile. Her hands trembled as she clenched and unclenched them. It wasn't hesitation, it was weight. The weight of what she was about to do. Because to pull this off, she had to keep alive, keep him unsuspecting. That meant risking every man in his team for a little while longer. A terrible gamble. Her chest ached with the thought. She remembered Tor's again, that easy grin in the photo now framed by black borders. How many more would die if she waited too long? How many would she have to sacrifice just to catch one traitor? Her breath came out shaky. She whispered to herself, voice ragged. You can't save everyone, but you can stop him. The decision in that moment. She wouldn't rush. She would bait him, control him, make his betrayal the very weapon that would end the ambushes. Scarlet sat back down, pulling up a blank operations draft. If wanted intel, she would give it to him, just not the kind he expected. The next morning, she stood outside the SEAL's planning room. Voices carried through the steel door, low, confident, layered with a bravado she couldn't share. When she entered, conversation stilled briefly, eyes flicking toward her, then away. She was used to it. To them, she was an outsider, the one behind a desk, not boots on the ground. But she saw things they didn't, and today she would begin steering their fate. Morning, Captain, Lieutenant Commander said. His voice was deep, steady, belonging to a man who had led brothers into fire and returned with fewer than he left. The new lines etched into his face told Scarlet all she needed. Each mission's failure weighed on him more heavily than any bullet. Scarlet handed him the folder. Proposed op. High-value target, northern compound. Satellite confirms enemy presence. Flipped through it, brow furrowing. Timing. 48 hours. He grunted, we'll prep. Scarlet's eyes lingered on. He sat near the end of the table, posture easy, smile faint. A man comfortable in the room among brothers. No sign of the rot beneath. She forced herself to look away. If she stared too long, if her suspicion showed, he might sense it. The meeting ended, gathered his men, voices low as they dispersed, laughed at a joke someone cracked, and Scarlet walked out, her pulse hammering because she knew that by nightfall that very folder would be in enemy hands. Back in her office, she pulled up secure channels. With quiet cooperation, she had prepared two plans, one false, carefully crafted for to leak, the other real, hidden, the true mission. The trick would be in the timing. Hours later, her computer pinged. Another message from, this time it was an image. A snapshot of him and two teammates at the gym, grinning, sweat slicked. To the untrained eye, harmless. To Scarlet, filled with coded numbers tucked in pixel data. The ambush had just been triggered. Scarlet's jaw tightened. She typed quickly, dispatching orders to units already positioned. Armored support, drone surveillance. The pieces slid into place. A quiet orchestration only she could hear. And all the while thought he was clever. That night Scarlet drove back to her small apartment, exhaustion heavy on her bones. She didn't turn on the lights, just dropped her bag, sat on the edge of the couch and stared into the dark. For the first time in days, her walls cracked. She pressed her palms to her face, muffling the ragged sound that tore from her throat. Not quite a sob, not quite anger, something heavier. Because beneath the mission planning, the calculations, the long hours, lay something personal. Betrayal wasn't just data to her. She thought of her father, a Navy man who had once trusted a comrade too easily. That trust had cost him his career, dragged his name through investigations he never deserved. He'd spent years trying to rebuild honor that had been stolen by another man's lies. She remembered the look in his eyes, wounded pride, shame that wasn't his to carry. Scarlet clenched her fists. She wouldn't let that happen again, not to her, not to these men. The next day called. His voice came through low, measured. They're moving, just like you said. Whole cell walked right into us. Scarlet closed her eyes. Relief hit like a wave. For once, the enemy had been the one caught off guard. But even as she exhaled, she knew this was only the beginning. Still walked free, still smiled with his brothers, still carried the trust of men who would die for him. And she had to let him keep it. Because if she moved too soon, the trail would go cold. She needed to know who he was sending intel to, who else was connected, how deep the rot ran. It was a dangerous game, and every second she played it, good men remained at risk. She stood by the window of her office, watching dawn bleed across the horizon. The base stirred to life outside, boots on gravel, hum of engines, voices rising in cadence. Men preparing for another mission. Men who didn't know one of their own was feeding them to the wolves. Scarlet whispered to the glass, her reflection staring back at her with tired, determined eyes. Just a little longer, hold on a little longer, I'll end this. Her hand pressed flat against the cool pane, as though she could shield them through sheer will. But deep down, a heavier question gnawed at her. When the truth came out, when the masks were ripped away, would they forgive her for waiting this long, for gambling with their lives in order to catch the traitor in their midst? Or would they look at her the way they would look at him, through eyes filled with betrayal? Scarlet turned from the window, the weight of it pressing into her bones. The answer would come, just not yet. Because wasn't done, and neither was she. How long could she pretend not to know? Scarlet sat in the back of the surveillance van, headphones pressing into her ears, listening to the coded silence of betrayal. His voice filtered through, easy and warm, talking about a barbecue he wanted to host when he rotated stateside. To anyone else, it sounded like harmless chatter. To Scarlet, the pauses, the timing, the odd emphasis on fireworks near the old pier lit up like alarms. She scribbled notes, her handwriting jagged across the page. Every casual phrase was a signal. Every laugh was a dagger. Across from her, an NSA technician adjusted the signal intercept. He didn't look at her. He didn't know what she knew. To him, this was just noise, data to be analyzed later. But Scarlet's chest tightened with each word. She'd spent weeks carrying the secret alone, watching Smask fool everyone around him. To the team, he was still Hawk, the steady operator, the guy who joked when things got heavy, the one they trusted to watch their backs in the darkest nights. They didn't know he was the reason so many never came back. The technician yawned, rubbing his eyes. "Just sounds like family talk, ma'am. You sure we're not wasting our time here?" Scarlet's jaw tightened. She forced her voice to stay calm, keep recording every second. She couldn't tell him. Not yet. If word spread, would vanish into the shadows of bureaucracy or worse, switch methods before she was ready. She needed him to feel safe, to keep leaking, to believe he was untouchable. And yet the longer she waited, the more lives balanced on the edge. She pulled the headphones off, resting them around her neck. The van's air was stale, heavy with the faint smell of coffee and electronics. Her eyes burned from sleeplessness, her heart from something heavier. Was she protecting the team, or betraying them herself by holding back? That question lingered long after she left the van, long after the sun set and the base quieted. In the silence of her office, she sat staring at photo, his grin taunting her from the personnel file. She whispered into the dark, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You don't even look like a traitor. That's the worst part." Her phone buzzed. "Captain," his voice was gravel lined with fatigue. "Intel checks out. The compound was empty, again." Scarlet closed her eyes, her heart sank. Another mission, another trap sprung too late. "How many?" she asked quietly. A pause, 2 wounded, no KIA. "We got lucky this time." Lucky, the word felt like poison. Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream that it wasn't luck, it was, that the man trusted had handed their position to the enemy hours before the team deployed. But the words stuck. She couldn't. Not yet. "Understood," she said instead, voice flat. When the call ended, silence pressed in again. She leaned forward, elbows on the desk, head in her hands. Her chest ached. Her mind raced. Every delay cut deeper, but rushing would mean losing the chance to expose the entire network behind. She forced herself to breathe, steady, controlled. This wasn't just about him. It was about the unseen hands pulling his strings. Her laptop screen flickered. A new message flagged by the monitoring system. Again, another harmless photo, this time of a sunlit park, children playing in the distance. But the data hidden inside wasn't harmless. Scarlet extracted it, her eyes tracing the decoded text. Coordinates, timetables, everything an enemy needed. Her hands trembled on the keyboard. She wanted to smash it, to scream, to storm down the hall and put handcuffs on him herself. Instead, she sat still, quiet, letting the rage burn inside without spilling over. Because emotion couldn't win this war, patience had to. The next morning, she walked the base corridors, her uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. The SEALs passed her, nodding politely, most barely meeting her gaze. She didn't blame them. To them, she was just intel, necessary, distant, not one of them. But met her eyes, just for a moment. His grin flickered, small, sharp, a flash of something that made her stomach drop. Did he suspect, or was she imagining it? Scarlet forced herself to keep walking, her steps even. Inside, her pulse thundered. Later that day called another briefing. The men gathered around the table, maps spread out, tension heavy in the air. Another mission loomed, another chance to play both sides. Scarlet stood by the projector, her presentation ready. She pointed out routes, contingencies, fallback positions. Her voice was steady, professional. No one knew that half the details she outlined weren't real. They were bait. Studied her, eyes narrowing slightly. He knew part of what she was doing. Not the whole truth, not yet, but enough to trust her judgment. The SEALs scribbled notes, their faces set in grim determination. 2. His pen moved quickly, his expression unreadable. Scarlet's stomach churned. She was feeding them a plan that wasn't fully real, playing a game with their lives as the stakes. She told herself it was necessary, that without this trap, the enemy would keep cutting them down. But inside, a quieter voice whispered, "If they die, it's on you too." The meeting ended. The men filed out, voices low, weapons slung casually as they prepared. Lingered a moment longer, tucking his notes away. He glanced at her, that same faint grin brushing his lips. Scarlet's skin prickled. He knew something, or he thought he did. That night she sat awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Her mind replayed every moment, the missions gone wrong, the men lost, the trust broken. She thought of Tor's again, his mother's voice on the casualty call. She remembered the silence on the line after the words "killed in action." The kind of silence that broke something permanent. Scarlet pressed her palms against her eyes, forcing the memory back. She couldn't afford to feel too much. Not now. Her phone buzzed, an alert again. Her hands shook as she opened the file. Another coded image, another leak. This time she didn't analyze it alone. She forwarded it straight to, with a single line, "Deploy trap, tonight." The wheels were in motion. The enemy thought they knew everything. But for once, Scarlet was ahead. She sat back, heart pounding. The gamble was about to pay off or collapse around her. And in that fragile silence, a thought whispered through her mind, one she couldn't shake. When the dust settled, when was unmasked, would the SEALs see her as the one who saved them, or the one who played with their lives in silence? She closed her eyes, whispering into the empty room, "Please let it be enough." The night was too quiet. Scarlet stood in the dim operations center, eyes locked on the wall of monitors that tracked every movement of SEAL Team Bravo. Dots crawled across the digital map, tiny blue markers representing men who trusted each other with their lives, men who had no idea one of their own had already betrayed them. She clenched her fists behind her back. Her throat was dry, her heart pounding so loud it felt as if it might betray her thoughts. The screens flickered with drone footage, empty roads, a dark compound lit only by a pale moon, shadows stretching like blades. His voice crackled through the comms, calm, controlled, the voice of a man who had been here too many times before. "Bravo 1 moving to entry, stand by." Scarlet's stomach twisted. She wasn't watching a mission, she was watching a trap himself had set in motion. Only this time the enemy didn't know they were the ones being hunted. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the drone camera panned. Enemy trucks rolled into position exactly where his message had said they would. Dozens of them. Fighters spilling out, rifles glinting under moonlight. They thought they were preparing to ambush unsuspecting Americans. They had no idea U.S. armored support was already waiting, concealed, circling them like wolves. Scarlet's breath caught as gunfire erupted. The monitors exploded with movement, tracers streaking, shadows scattering, vehicles bursting into flame. But this time the ambush was reversed. The SEALs weren't walking into a massacre. They were walking into vengeance. She gripped the console, knuckles white. Every shout over comms, every distant explosion pressed into her chest. She hated it, hated listening from the safety of a control room while others fought. But she knew this was her battlefield. And tonight, she had turned betrayal into a weapon. Minutes stretched like hours, then's voice cut through the static again. "Target neutralized, enemy scattered, 0 Bravo casualties, repeat 0. Scarlet closed her eyes. Relief flooded her, heavy and raw. For the first time in months, not a single SEAL had died in an ambush. But the victory wasn't clean, not yet. Because still sat among them, laughing, bleeding sweat like the others, pretending his hands weren't already covered in the blood of his brothers. Scarlet opened her eyes. Her reflection stared back from the dark glass of the monitor, tired, pale, but resolute. She whispered, so quiet only she could hear, "You're running out of time." When the team returned to base, Scarlet watched from a distance. The men strode off the transport, gear slung heavy, faces marked with dirt and exhaustion. Some clapped each other on the shoulders, their relief masked by practiced stoicism. Walked among them. His grin was faint, calculated. He played his part well, celebrating just enough, blending into the brotherhood. Anyone else would missed it, but Scarlet saw the flicker in his eyes. Not joy, not relief, something colder. Confusion. Because the mission he thought he'd sabotaged had ended differently. The enemy hadn't won. They'd been crushed. Scarlet's pulse quickened. Did he suspect her? Did he know the leak had been manipulated? She turned away before his eyes could meet hers. Back in her office, she locked the door and spread the latest intel across her desk. She traced the lines of intercepted communications, following the digital trail from emails through a labyrinth of servers. Each one peeled away another layer of secrecy. Each step brought her closer to the foreign handlers orchestrating this betrayal. Her phone buzzed. "Captain," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Good work tonight. You kept us alive." Scarlet's throat tightened. She didn't answer right away, because she hadn't kept them alive, at least not alone. They walked into a trap because she let them. She gambled their lives for the bigger picture. Finally, she forced out the words, "Thank you, sir." Paused, "But I have to ask, how long have you known?" Scarlet froze. "Known what?" "That someone's feeding them," said quietly. "Don't bother denying it. The timing, the way the enemy moves, it's too precise. Somebody's playing both sides." Her chest ached. She wanted to tell him everything, wanted to lift the weight from her shoulders and share it, but she couldn't. Not yet. If confronted too soon, the entire operation would collapse. The handlers would vanish. The proof would scatter like smoke. So she swallowed the truth. "We're investigating all possibilities." Silence cut deep. He wasn't a man easily fooled. He knew she wasn't telling him everything, but after a moment he let it go. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Tonight was the first time in months my men came home breathing. Don't make me regret trusting you." When the line went dead, Scarlet sat back in her chair, eyes burning. Trust. The word clawed at her. How could she claim to protect it while burying lies of her own? She thought of the way he'd smiled at her after the last briefing, the way his eyes seemed to measure her. She whispered into the dark, "You think you're the only one playing this game. You're wrong." The next few days were a blur of planning and waiting. Scarlet barely slept. She monitored constantly, his emails, his calls, even his movements across the base. The surveillance teams reported nothing unusual. He was careful, too careful. One night, while reviewing a batch of intercepted photos, she noticed something. A single detail almost too small to matter. In the corner of a family picture, a bookshelf. On it, a framed photograph of a man in uniform, not American, foreign. Scarlet's breath hitched. A mistake. A glimpse behind the mask. She zoomed in, heart pounding. The insignia on the uniform was faint but recognizable. The intelligence agency of a hostile nation. Wasn't freelancing. He wasn't acting alone. He was tied directly to one of the most dangerous enemies America faced. Her hands trembled as she saved the file, encrypting it for evidence. The net was tightening. But still she couldn't move. Not yet. Not until she had the whole picture. The next operation was scheduled for 72 hours later. Scarlet crafted the false plan with meticulous care, weaving just enough truth into the fiction to make it believable. She handed it with steady hands, though her chest burned with guilt. And just as she expected, passed it on within hours. This time the enemy response was bigger, faster, more aggressive. They threw everything they had at the Phantom mission, and once again they walked into the trap Scarlet had built. The battle was brutal. Explosions lit the night sky, turning darkness into fire. Scarlet listened to the comms, her stomach churning with every shouted command, every burst of gunfire. She hated the violence, hated that this was what it took. But when the dust cleared, Bravo was still standing, and the enemy decimated. Scarlet exhaled, shoulders sagging. Another gamble had paid off. But even in victory, a shadow lingered. Because every time's betrayal backfired, his suspicion grew. She saw it in the way he watched her now, his grin, his eyes sharper. He was starting to wonder. And Scarlet knew it was only a matter of time before the hunter realized he was also the hunted. What happens when the traitor realizes he's the one being hunted? Scarlet saw the first crack at breakfast. The seals sat in their usual spot, loud and alive, trading jabs and stories between mouthfuls of eggs, but wasn't laughing. He smiled when expected, nodded at jokes, but his eyes kept drifting, not at his teammates, at her. Scarlet kept her gaze fixed on her coffee. She stirred it slowly, pretending to read the morning report. But she felt it, the weight of his suspicion pressing against her skin. He knew something had shifted. Her pulse thudded. She told herself not to overthink. He couldn't know the details, not yet. The deception was still working. The enemy had walked into 2 traps already. Handlers must have been furious, but they wouldn't cut ties so quickly. He was still valuable to them. Still, suspicion was dangerous. If sensed the net tightening, he might stop leaking. Or worse, he might vanish before she could prove everything. She took a slow sip of coffee, forcing calm into her movements. The trick wasn't to outstare him. The trick was to pretend she hadn't noticed. Pretend she was still blind. But deep inside, her stomach coiled. Later in her office, Scarlet replayed the surveillance feeds. His pattern was shifting. He no longer lingered at the rec center. He avoided long calls in the barracks. His emails came shorter, sharper, stripped of the casual tone that had once disguised them. He was adapting, testing. Scarlet scribbled notes across her pad, her handwriting fierce. Losing patience, increasing risk. She leaned back, pressing the pen against her lips. Every adjustment made tighten the timeline. She couldn't string this out much longer. One wrong move and he'd vanish into the fog of military transfers, red tape, or worse yet, into a shallow grave arranged by his handlers. Her phone buzzed. "Captain," his voice came low, rough. "What aren't you telling me?" Scarlet froze, silence stretched. "Every op you've touched lately has ended different," continued. "Cleaner, too clean, someone's bleeding for us, and I need to know who." Scarlet closed her eyes. She wanted to tell him, wanted to unload the burden that had grown heavier with every passing hour. But she couldn't, not yet. If the SEALs knew, they'd tear apart before she had the evidence to dismantle the whole network. Her voice came steady, though her throat burned. "Sir, I'm running counterintelligence protocols. That's all I can say." Silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, he muttered, "Don't wait too long, Captain. My men can smell when something's rotten, and when they do, there won't be a trial." The line went dead. Scarlet's chest tightened. He was right. The SEALs weren't blind. Brotherhood sharpened instinct, and betrayal left a scent no one could wash off. If they caught before she moved, the result wouldn't be justice. It would be vengeance. And part of her wondered, would that be so wrong? She shoved the thought away. Justice mattered. The truth mattered. If she let vengeance win, handlers would scatter, free to recruit another desperate man. That night she sat alone in her apartment, lights off, staring at the faint glow of the city beyond the window. The silence pressed heavy. For weeks, she had lived on caffeine, adrenaline, and quiet rage. But tonight, doubt crept in. Was she doing the right thing? How many more missions could she risk? How many more lives balanced on her silence? Her phone buzzed again, a new intercept. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. This time, no family picture, no coded camping trip. Just a blank message with a single attachment, a sound file. She plugged in her headphones, static at first, then a voice, low, foreign, speaking in clipped English. "Your information failed twice. Explain, or you are no longer useful." Scarlet's breath caught was slipping. His handlers were losing patience. And when handlers lost patience, their assets didn't retire, disappeared. She exhaled slowly, mind racing. This was her chance. If she could intercept his reply, if she could capture his communication in real time, she could tie him directly to the network. No more shadows, no more doubt. But it meant letting him keep talking, letting him believe he still had room to maneuver. Her hands shook as she set the trap. Surveillance teams primed. Every keystroke he typed, every click he made would be mirrored onto her screen. Hours later, sat at his barracks desk, the glow of his laptop painting his face. Scarlet watched through the remote feed, her breath held. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He typed slowly, deliberately. Complications. Enemy change position, adjusting strategy, stand by. Scarlet's stomach twisted. He was lying to his handlers now, covering his failure with excuses. She almost smiled. Even betrayal had its hierarchy, and now was the one dancing on the edge of a blade. But then he hesitated. His gaze flicked toward the corner of the room as if sensing unseen eyes. Scarlet's pulse spiked. Did he know? He closed the laptop abruptly. The feed went dark. Scarlet's breath came shallow. Her screen flashed red, connection lost. For the first time, had broken pattern completely. She pushed back from her desk, packing, boots echoing against the floor, sweat pricking the back of her neck. The net was tightening, yes, but he felt it too. Her phone rang, a secure line. His voice came sharp. "We've got movement, requesting leave, last minute, civilian cover story, something doesn't add up." Scarlet stopped cold. If he left base now, she might lose him forever. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "Deny it, stall him, whatever it takes." Paused. "You're pushing hard, Captain. Tell me why." Scarlet's jaw clenched. The lie pressed heavy against her teeth. She swallowed it down. "He's connected to something I need to close. If he leaves now, we lose the chance." Exhaled, low and dangerous. "You've got one more shot, Wilson. One. After that, I'm handling it my way." The line went dead. Scarlet leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. One more shot. That was all she had left. One chance to prove guilty beyond question. One chance to drag his handlers into the light. And if she failed? Her eyes burned. She whispered into the silence, "God help me, I can't fail now." The next day passed her in the corridor. For the first time, he didn't smile. His eyes lingered on her, sharp and cold, as if weighing how much she knew. Scarlet's pulse hammered, but she forced her expression to stay neutral, professional, detached. She walked past him without breaking stride. Inside, though, she felt it. The line had been crossed. The mask was slipping. New. And the game was about to end. How do you stare into the eyes of a traitor and pretend you don't know? Scarlet sat in the briefing room, the low hum of the projector filling the silence as maps flickered across the wall. The SEALs leaned forward in their chairs, focused, tired, their faces set in the same unbreakable stone she'd seen 100 times before. They were men ready to walk into fire again. And was among them. He sat near the center, pen tapping lightly against his notebook. His jaw was tense. The grin he usually wore was gone. Instead, his eyes flicked to Scarlet every so often, sharp, searching, as if daring her to meet his gaze. Scarlet kept her eyes on the map. She outlined the operation with steady hands, her voice calm, precise. Every route she traced on the screen was a calculated lie, breadcrumbs designed to lure the enemy. Scribbled notes, but Scarlet saw it. The faint hesitation in his pen strokes, the way he paused before writing certain details. He was second-guessing. He knew the ground beneath him was shifting. When the briefing ended, the men filed out. Gave her a nod, half respect, half suspicion. He was trusting her, but the weight of that trust pressed heavy on her shoulders. Lingered. Scarlet felt it before she saw it. The room emptied until it was just the two of them, silence thick in the air. She packed her files slowly, keeping her movements deliberate, controlled. Then came his voice, smooth, low, too casual. Funny how the enemy keeps walking into traps lately. Scarlet's hand froze on the folder, her pulse hammered. She forced her face neutral before turning. That's the job, adapt faster than they do. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, eyes narrowing. Yeah, but it's almost like they're being fed bad intel, over and over, almost like someone's setting them up. Scarlet's throat tightened. He was testing her, probing. She tilted her head, her voice cool. What are you implying? Shrugged, the gesture too loose, too deliberate. Nothing, just noticing patterns. You're the intel expert, right? Patterns are your thing. Scarlet held his gaze. His eyes were cold now, no hint of the warmth his teammates trusted. For a moment she saw the mask slip, and the man underneath was nothing but calculation. She forced a faint smile. Then maybe you should leave the patterns to me. His grin flickered back, sharp and humorless. Maybe I should. He stood and walked out, leaving the words hanging in the air like a loaded gun. Scarlet exhaled slowly, her hands trembling as she gathered her files. The line had been crossed, suspected, and suspicion made him dangerous. Back in her office, she shut the door and leaned against it, her chest heaving. She whispered into the quiet, voice breaking at the edges. He knows. The thought clawed at her. If felt cornered, he wouldn't hesitate. He could vanish, destroy evidence, even lash out. Men like him didn't go quietly. Her computer pinged. A new intercept. She sat quickly, eyes scanning the decoded data, had sent another message short, clipped. Trust compromised, adjusting contact. Scarlet's stomach dropped. He wasn't just doubting her, he was telling his handlers. Her hands flew over the keyboard, pulling every resource she had, tracing the signal, following the trail. It leapt across servers, hidden paths, encrypted routes. But for the first time she caught a glimpse of the destination, a foreign command hub. The kind that didn't just coordinate spies, it commanded soldiers. Her pulse surged. This was the link she needed, the proof that could shatter any defense tried to spin, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. She had to catch him in the act. Her phone rang. Again, his voice came clipped, urgent. Wilson, talk to me. Something off with my men are noticing he's slipping. Scarlet closed her eyes. The truth pressed hard against her lips. She wanted to say it, wanted to finally name the traitor. But she couldn't. Not until she had the evidence locked so tight no one could shake it. Her voice came low, steady. We're close. Just hold them steady, Commander. One more mission, that's all I need. Didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was harder. If you're wrong, Captain, I'm burying another man, and that'll be on you. The line went dead. Scarlet leaned forward, her forehead pressing against the cool desk surface. Her eyes burned. She whispered into the silence. I know, God help me, I know. The next operation was set for 48 hours later. Scarlet crafted the false plan with surgical precision, every detail designed to bait, to push him into one last leak. She printed the file, slid it across desk, and forced herself to meet his gaze. This one ends it, she said softly. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. No words, just trust and the warning that came with it. When the briefing began, Scarlet stood at the front again, presenting the plan. Her voice was calm, measured, but inside her heart pounded, because every word she spoke wasn't just for the SEALs. It was for. She saw him jot the notes, saw the faint clench of his jaw, saw the hesitation, and then the decision. His pen moved faster, committing every detail to memory. Scarlet's chest tightened. He'd taken the bait. That night she waited in her office. The base was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. She stared at her monitor, exhaustion dragging at her bones, until finally the alert came. Had sent the intel. Scarlet's hands shook as she watched the data spill across her screen. This was it, the proof, the final nail. She had him. But as she leaned forward, studying the intercept, her breath caught. Something was different. The intel he sent wasn't a perfect copy of her plan. He'd altered details, shifted times, adjusted routes. He wasn't just leaking anymore, he was testing, feeding both sides. Scarlet's pulse raced. He was trying to confirm whether he was being played. Her stomach dropped. If the enemy realized they'd been manipulated, the trap would collapse and would vanish. She pushed back from her desk, packing. The walls felt too close, the air too thin. She had to move now, no more delays. Her phone buzzed again. His voice came urgent. "Wilson, intel just hit. Enemies moving faster than usual, almost like they know something. What's going on?" Scarlet swallowed hard. The decision pressed heavy, crushing. If she stayed silent any longer, men would die. If she spoke now, she risked losing the bigger game. Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. He's the leak." The silence on the line was long, heavy. Then spoke low and dangerous. "Say that again." Scarlet's hands trembled. "Been feeding them for weeks. I've been tracking him. Tonight we end it." His breath came hard through the phone. "If you're wrong." "I'm not," Scarlet cut in. Her voice was steady now, all doubt burned away by resolve. "I'll stake everything on it." Silence, then, "Understood, we'll move." The line went dead. Scarlet leaned against the desk, her chest heaving. The secret she had carried for weeks was finally spoken aloud. The weight should have lifted, but it didn't. It only shifted, heavier, sharper. Because now there was no turning back. And knew the walls were closing in. What happens when the mask finally breaks? The base was still, the air heavy with a silence that felt wrong. Scarlet walked the corridor alone, her boots striking against concrete, each step echoing louder than it should. She could feel it, something shifting, the storm gathering. The secret she'd held so tightly was out now. Knew. The SEALs would know soon. And Scarlet's stomach knotted. Men like him didn't wait to be cornered. She reached the operations center just as was finishing his briefing with the team. The men stood in a tight circle, weapons checked, faces carved from stone. They hadn't been told everything yet, but they knew enough. She saw it in their eyes, the unease, the way they looked at each other too long, the unspoken fear that trust was cracking. Stood with them, calm, too calm. He strapped his rifle, his hands steady, his jaw tight. When his eyes flicked to Scarlet, the faint grin he'd once worn was gone. Now his expression was sharper, harder, as if every muscle in his face was holding back a truth. Dismiss the men. They filed out, one by one, until only lingered near the back. Scarlet felt his gaze on her even as she turned to gather her files. His voice came low, casual, almost mocking. "Funny thing, Captain. People talk about loyalty like it's simple, like it's black and white." Scarlet froze, then slowly turned. Leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes cold. "But it's not, is it?" he continued. "Loyalty depends on what you believe in, who you believe in. Sometimes it's not the guy beside you. Sometimes it's something bigger." Her chest tightened. She heard the confession under the words, the justification. She forced her voice steady. "You think betrayal can be explained away with philosophy." He shrugged, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. "Call it what you want. Betrayal, survival, depends on the angle." Scarlet stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his. "Tell that to Tours. Tell it to the men who bled out because you sold them." For a moment the mask slipped entirely. His smirk vanished, his jaw tightening. But then he leaned in, his voice dropping. "You don't know what I've done, or why. Don't pretend you understand." Scarlet's pulse hammered. She wanted to tear the truth out of him right there, but the timing wasn't hers alone anymore. She held his gaze a second longer, then turned away, her voice cold. "You're right, I don't understand, because nothing makes sense of what you've done." She walked out before he could answer, though she felt his eyes burning into her back. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat in her dark apartment, staring at the wall, every sound outside making her nerves twitch. Knew the net was closing. That made him desperate, and desperation made men reckless. Her phone buzzed, a secure line. "Wilson, it's time." Scarlet's chest tightened. She grabbed her bag and headed back. The trap was simple, brutal. The SEALs were fed another operation plan, would leak it as always. But this time every channel was monitored in real time, every keystroke mirrored, and when he sent it there would be no denying it. Scarlet stood in the surveillance room, monitors glowing blue against her tired face. Her hands gripped the console as she watched the feed, sat at his desk, typing. His expression was tight, his movements faster than usual. He knew. He was racing the clock. And then he hit send. Scarlet's screen lit up. The file decrypted instantly. Coordinates, routes, times. Enough to damn him 10 times over. Her chest heaved. This was it, proof undeniable. She slammed the comms button. "It's him, move." Alarms blared across the base. Heavy boots thundered in the corridors. Scarlet sprinted from the room, heart pounding, breath ragged. She knew where he'd go, wouldn't wait for a knock at his door. He'd be running. She turned a corner just as chaos erupted ahead. Shouts, orders barked, the metallic snap of weapons raised. Stood at the end of the hall, bag slung over his shoulder, pistol drawn. His eyes were wild now, no calm, no mask, just a man exposed. "Drop it, Hawk," his voice boomed, his men closing in. His pistol swung, his hands steady despite the storm in his eyes. He didn't fire. Not yet. His gaze flicked once toward Scarlet. And in that look she saw it all. The defiance, the fear, the final, desperate pride of a man who believed betrayal was his only way to matter. Scarlet's throat ached. She stepped forward, her voice breaking against the air. "David, don't, it's over. Whatever they promised you, it's gone, you've lost." For the first time his face faltered. The mask slipped into something almost human. Pain, shame. But then his jaw tightened again, his voice a low growl. "You don't know what I've given up. You don't know what they hold." Scarlet's chest constricted. "Then tell me, tell us, make it mean something, don't end it here." The hall was silent except for the steady aim of rifles. His hand twitched on the pistol. For a heartbeat, Scarlet thought he might lower it. Then he bolted. The corridor erupted, shouts, boots pounding, sprinted toward the exit, gunfire cracking overhead. Scarlet chased without thinking, her lungs burning, her pulse screaming in her ears. He tore through the compound, desperate, reckless. She followed, every muscle screaming, every thought fixed on one truth. If he escaped, everything they'd built collapsed. They cornered him at the airstrip. Searchlights flooded the tarmac, shadows stretching long. Spun, pistol raised, his chest heaving. Scarlet skidded to a stop, breath ragged. She raised her hands slightly, palms out. "Don't, David, this is done. Don't make them kill you." His eyes darted between her and the rifles aimed his way. Sweat streaked his face. His voice cracked when he spoke. "You don't get it. They'll never stop. Not with me gone, not with me alive, it doesn't matter." Scarlet's voice softened, though her chest ached. "Then let us stop them. But you, this choice right now, it's yours. Don't take the last shred of dignity you have left." The silence stretched. His pistol shook in his hands. For a moment she thought he might lower it. Then his voice cut through, sharp as steel. "Enough, drop it." His jaw clenched. His eyes met Scarlet's one last time. A storm of regret, defiance, and something unspoken passed between them. And then slowly, heavily, he dropped the pistol. The SEALs swarmed him, forcing him to the ground, cuffs snapping around his wrists. The fight drained out of him all at once, leaving only a hollow shell of the man he'd pretended to be. Scarlet stood frozen, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. Relief and grief tangled inside her until she couldn't tell them apart. It was over. But as was dragged away, his voice rose one last time, raw and jagged. "You think this ends with me. "You're wrong, you're already too late." The words hung in the air long after he was gone. Scarlet's skin prickled. The victory tasted bitter, because deep down she knew he wasn't lying. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. What do you do when the traitor is finally unmasked? When the man you chased in shadows is sitting under the weight of handcuffs, head bowed, eyes empty? Scarlet asked herself that question as she watched through the reinforced glass of the interrogation room. He sat hunched, wrists chained to the table, the smirk he once wore gone. In its place was a hollow expression, a man stripped of pretense. Stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight. He hadn't spoken since they'd brought in. The SEAL commander was a man of action, but betrayal wasn't something fists or bullets could fix. It gnawed at him, left a wound no battlefield medic could heal. Finally, he muttered, "He ate with us, laughed with us, watched our backs," and all the while his voice trailed off raw with disgust. Scarlet didn't answer. She knew words couldn't mend that kind of break. Inside the room shifted, glancing toward the glass as if he knew she was there. His lips curled faintly, almost daring her to step inside. She didn't. Not yet. The trial came quickly. The evidence Scarlet had gathered was overwhelming: emails, coded photos, intercepted communications, financial records hidden beneath layers of laundering. There was no escaping it. Had been theirs, and then he'd been someone else. Scarlet sat through every day of the proceedings. She listened as the prosecutors laid out the missions he had compromised, the men who had died because of his whispers. She watched as families sat in the gallery, their grief like a silent storm. Mothers, fathers, wives, children. People who would never again see the ones they loved because had chosen money and ideology over brotherhood. When her turn came, Scarlet took the stand. She spoke calmly, clinically, her words precise. But beneath the professionalism, her chest burned with anger, with sorrow, with something she couldn't quite name. She told the court how she had tracked him, how she had turned his betrayal into a weapon against the very enemies he served. She told them how many lives had been saved, not because of, but in spite of him. And when she stepped down, she felt the weight of every eye in the room, some with gratitude, some with suspicion, all with questions no verdict could answer. The sentence was life in prison, no possibility of parole. Didn't flinch when the judge spoke the words. He just sat there, hollow, staring at nothing, as if he'd already accepted that his war was over. But Scarlet knew better. Wars like this never really ended. Months later, the world moved on. The SEALs continued their missions. New names filled the rosters, new faces joined the fight. But the scar remained. Trust wasn't something easily rebuilt once it had been fractured. Scarlet was promoted, her work recognized. She was tasked with building new protocols, new systems to guard against betrayal from within. The Guardian program was born from her designs, a web of monitoring, counseling, financial oversight, and subtle intervention, not to destroy trust but to protect it. She traveled from base to base, briefing commanders, speaking to units. At first, resistance was strong. Soldiers bristled at the idea of being watched, of their private lives scrutinized. Trust, they argued, was about blind faith. Scarlet stood before them, her voice steady but soft. "Trust isn't blind," she told them. "Real trust means knowing the man beside you has been tested, protected, and shielded from the pressures that could turn him. We don't monitor because we doubt you. We monitor because we refuse to lose you." Slowly the message sank in. Slowly the resistance gave way to understanding. The years passed. Reports of compromised missions dwindled. Potential threats were flagged early, handled before they could fester. Families were offered help before debts or personal struggles could be exploited. Scarlet saw the change in the men she briefed. They stood a little taller, not because someone was watching them, but because someone was watching over them. And yet the memory of never left her. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit alone with the old files spread across her desk. His photograph stared back at her, that familiar grin that had fooled them all. She wondered if he thought about the faces of the men he betrayed, if he saw them in his dreams, if guilt ever reached him behind the walls of his prison. She doubted it. Some men made peace with their choices in ways she couldn't understand. But she understood this. Betrayal would always be possible. No program, no system, no protocol could erase it entirely. Human beings were fragile, vulnerable, corruptible. The trick wasn't to build walls high enough to keep betrayal out. It was to build foundations strong enough to withstand it. 1 year after his conviction, Scarlet was invited to speak at a conference. The room was filled with officers, analysts, strategists, men and women who had spent their careers studying war from every angle. She stood at the podium, her voice carrying across the quiet hall. The case I worked wasn't just about catching a traitor. It was about understanding that betrayal isn't always foreign. Sometimes it wears the same uniform, eats at the same table, bleeds the same blood. That's what makes it dangerous. That's what makes it devastating. She paused, letting the silence sink in. But betrayal doesn't erase loyalty. It doesn't destroy trust. It tests it. And if we learn, if we adapt, if we refuse to let one man's choices poison the whole, then trust can be stronger than it was before. When she stepped off the stage, a young officer approached her. His voice shook slightly. "Ma'am, how do you carry it, knowing what you know, seeing what you've seen?" Scarlet thought for a long moment before answering. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "You don't carry it. You let it carve you, and you decide whether it breaks you or sharpens you." That night back in her quarters, Scarlet sat alone. The world outside was dark, silent. She thought of Tors, of the other men who never came home. She thought of, still leading his team with the weight of betrayal etched into his eyes. She thought of, alone in his cell. Her hands folded in her lap, her gaze distant. Sometimes, she reflected, the greatest victories weren't loud. They weren't explosions or triumphs shouted from rooftops. Sometimes they were quiet, invisible, the simple act of men walking into danger and walking back out alive. She closed her eyes. Because in the end, dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't boast. It simply acts.